be invisible.
He was living a double life.
My name is Melissa Moore, and my dad is a serial killer.
He was a long-haul trucker whose road trips became a killing spree.
Jesperson gave grisly details of how he killed 23-year-old Tanya Bennett.
Forced my fist into her throat, grabbed the rope and tied it around her neck.
A murderer with that notorious nickname.
Little did I know the happy-faced killer is my own father.
Tonight, his daughter coming out of the shadows and going public about the father who could be so loving, but sometimes lethal.
Did you choke all of the women?
That's what I had done with the first one, so I never changed. It worked the first time, so I went to the second and third, fourth, and fifth, sixth, and seventh.
About the day her children met their serial killer grandfather in prison.
That's one moment in being a mother that I wish I could take back.
And about the doubts that have haunted her.
Maybe I was a monster like him.
But now she has a new mission, seeking to atone in a way for the sins of her father.
Oh, here we go.
By meeting up with the family of a woman he murdered.
What was going through your mind as you knocked on that door?
But she's about to discover forgiveness doesn't come easy.
This person had a life. It's all about your dad, all about your dad, all about your dad.
A heart-wrenching encounter as cameras roll. Tonight on 2020, what happens when there's a monster in my family?
Logically, I know he is the father that raised me, and he is a serial killer, but to combine the two, it's just not possible for me.
I washed the blood off the wall and tried to forget about it.
Good evening. Tonight, an all-new journey of healing for a teenage girl, now a young woman, whose father did the unimaginable. He is serving a life sentence, but when you hear her story, you'll understand why she believes she is serving a sentence of her own. Because now the world knows what her father did, a serial killer who took the lives of 8 women over 5 years.
And tonight, right here, you're going to see how he was caught, the bragging, the taunting letters, the police interrogation tapes, even the chilling telephone calls with our own Juju Chang. You will also see what his daughter is now trying to do, reaching out to the children who have a monster in the family. Once again, here's Juju.
36-year-old Melissa Moore is taking the longest walk of her life alongside her mother. She's approaching the home of Michelle White.
Oh, here we go.
The sister of just one of 8 women her father murdered.
Meeting the victim's family was very, very difficult because I didn't know what to say. And I thought, oh my gosh, what am I in for?
This is not an easy journey for anyone. It's not an easy story to tell.
I'm coming into her space, into her world with nothing to offer her.
It's taken her 20 years to find the courage to knock on that door. But to understand how she got here, we have to go back to the beginning of Melissa's long journey to liberate herself from the guilt and shame of her family's legacy. A long search for answers about a father who wasn't at all what he appeared to be.
These were really good memories for me, being out here in the country. I could smell the alfalfa still. I could hear the birds and hear the animal sounds, the horse, just like I did when I was a child. So it makes me miss being a kid.
Hers was a scrappy upbringing in Toppenish, Washington, a rural and rugged community where the welcome sign celebrates where the West still lives.
I have memories of riding my bike, and my dad would kind of run behind me as I would be pedaling down the street here. Makes me miss having a dad.
These home videos depict an adoring dad. Here he is riding an ATV with his bundle of joy on board and showing off his daughter's shiny new snow boots.
Oh, new boots? Isn't that nice?
But behind the loving facade was a violent killer, a secret that would only be revealed years later. Melissa's the oldest of 3 children and always looked forward to when her dad, a long-haul truck driver, would return from a trip.
First thing I would do is, when he got out of the car, I'd run up to him and go for his pockets for the change that he had left over from his day. I got to keep the change, and I would save it up to buy a little gum and things like that.
Is she looking through rose-colored glasses, or were there really good times?
There really were good times.
Rose Huck is Melissa's mom.
At Christmas time, even if we didn't have the money, somehow he'd figure it out how to get the money and bring back what the kids really wanted for Christmas.
Would you describe him as a good husband?
No, he was not a good husband.
Why?
He was very distant with me.
Was he abusive to you?
No, he was not. If he was angry, he would walk away.
My dad would never spank me or hit me.
Describe him physically. I mean, he's a big man.
Yeah, he was 6'6" and about closer to 300 pounds.
Keith Jesperson, a large, handsome man with a dark side, which he mostly managed to keep hidden from his children, except for one traumatic event Melissa witnessed as a 6-year-old that she still remembers vividly.
One day when I went down here to go play with my brother and my sister house, I found some little kittens. They were resting right here. When I got out here, my dad was working out by the barn. He said, "Can I see him?" I said, "No." He grabbed him by the tail and hung them on the clothesline and wailing, screaming their little kitten screams. I ran inside the house to get my mom and I wanted it to stop, and then by the time we got back out and got out here, the kittens were laying on the ground over here. So I remember bending down and seeing that they were dead. The way he just looked at me was, "I don't care. This is so funny to watch you grimace and be tortured." He liked it.
I first met Melissa in 2010.
What is it that you think you caught a glimpse of that day?
The sociopath, the part where he felt in control over me and that he enjoyed it. I got a sense that there was another side to him.
So it's almost like you caught a glimpse of the monster who killed these people.
I did catch a glimpse.
A side he certainly didn't reveal to Rose when she fell in love with him as a teenager.
He was a very charismatic, considerate young man, and I had no clue that this is what he would become.
Rose says that after a decade of marriage, strange women started calling the house, and she began suspecting he was having affairs.
And I said, "Who is this?" And he goes, "Oh, I'm Keith's girlfriend." I said, "Well, I'm his wife." Click.
She had had enough, and after 14 years of marriage, the pair decided to separate. Rose and her 3 children left the orchards of where the kids spent their youth to drive 200 miles away to Spokane, Washington, to move into the cellar of their grandmother's home. But Melissa, now 10, still loved her dad.
She said, "Your father doesn't want us anymore and we're separating." And I thought, this is not the case. Dad loves us. Once he sees me again, he'll change his mind.
Although the family never reconciled, over the next 5 years, Melissa's father would visit whenever his trucking jobs took him their way.
I mean, come into town and take us out to eat, go shopping, and then after the shopping, he would take us to the grocery store. He would stay the night and leave the next morning.
Melissa says she never saw or heard anything unusual, except for those awkward conversations that might make any teenager cringe.
Wherever there was a female around, he had to say something that was inappropriate. He would start talking about his sexual acts with other women, and I didn't want to hear it. It was disgusting to me.
You knew it was wrong.
He was proud of his sexual experiences and wanted to share it.
Then a conversation at a diner that would haunt her for years to come.
The last time I saw my dad, he came to Spokane, just a sporadic visit, and we came to a diner like this. And he said, "I have something to tell you, but if I tell you, you'll tell the authorities, you'll tell the police." And then my stomach started to get upset.
When we come back, was Keith Jesperson about to confess what he really did during those long road trips?
My father said, "I know how to kill someone and get away with it."
And the grisly play-by-play confessions he would make to us over the phone.
It became a nonchalant type thing. It's like shoplifting.
It is nothing like shoplifting. You're killing somebody.
Stay with us.
Now back to 2020's Monster in My Family with Juju Chang.
It's absolutely breathtaking. You have a lot of fond memories of your dad here.
Right, I do.
After Melissa Moore's parents got divorced, her dad, that long-haul trucker, still made an effort to visit. Summer meant precious time together.
You know, I was amazed at over your lifetime how often he wanted to come to see you. I mean, he wanted to be a dad.
He really did.
Keith Jesperson grew up in British Columbia, Canada, the middle child of 5. He'd always loved camping and the outdoors. Later, when he would take his own children to Oregon's Multnomah Falls, Melissa says it brought out the kid in him.
He'd swim right in here, he'd go under the waterfall, and he would just have fun, laughing, and like nobody was around.
But back on the road, conversations sometimes veered to the grotesque, which Melissa wrote off as fantasy.
One time, as we're driving up the old scenic highway, my father said, "I know how to kill someone and get away with it." So I thought maybe the detective magazines was something he's really into, the forensics and crime, maybe he's into that.
Though she had no idea at the time, turns out what he was talking about was an actual murder, one he had just committed.
The same route that we would take going to the Oregon coast is where he disposed the first victim, just this way over that direction.
Melissa's dad, Keith Hunter Jesperson, is currently serving 3 life sentences in Oregon State Penitentiary. Prison officials will not allow Jesperson to conduct face-to-face interviews because they say he relishes the attention too much. But we did speak with him numerous times by phone in 2010.
What happened with the first murder?
I picked up a woman at a bar, took her home.
The conversations, extremely candid, full of disturbing details. A killer, in his own words, tells us how and why he committed the first of his grisly murders in January 1990, the very same year his divorce to Melissa's mom was finalized.
We were drinking beer a lot that day.
The woman he met in a Portland area bar was a 23-year-old named Tanya Bennett, described by family as overtly friendly and developmentally slow.
Took her home. I thought I was going to get lucky.
After a night of heavy drinking, the two left the bar and headed back to Jesperson's suburban red brick home, where he lured her and attempted to have sex.
Comments were made and different things, and an altercation happened, and I struck her. I actually had hit her in the face, and for some reason, I just kept on hitting her in the face, and because of that, I feared going to prison for slugging her in the face and causing bodily injury, and so I killed her.
You meant to kill her?
Oh, yes, I did. I meant to kill her to cover up the assault.
You say it very matter-of-factly, with no remorse or hint of remorse.
It is matter of fact, that's what it is.
After strangling Bennett with his bare hands, Jesperson left her lifeless body behind and returned to the bar to coldly continue drinking and establish an alibi. He then drove the body up the old scenic highway and dumped it in the dense brush just miles from where he and his children liked to frolic in those waterfalls.
I put the body up there in the Columbia River Gorge. I had tied a rope around its neck, mostly I didn't know how the body reacted when you started moving it.
Days later, Bennett's body was discovered, but Jesperson would not become a suspect. And this is where the story takes a strange turn. Out of the blue, a total stranger comes forward to take credit for the crime with a bizarre false confession. This woman tries to frame her abusive boyfriend, telling police he murdered Tanya Bennett, using details of the crime from newspaper reports. Detective Rick Buckner investigated the case.
She actually went so far as to buy a purse and put it in the trunk of John's car, claiming it was Tanya Bennett's.
Having incriminated herself, she now faced prison for something she had nothing to do with.
We had people in custody for a crime they didn't commit.
Meanwhile, the real killer is frustrated and envious of all the attention the pair is receiving for his crime.
I was puzzled. Let's say it was something that just caught me kind of like off guard, especially when I heard that one had confessed to it.
So back on the road, in a rest stop bathroom, he scribbles on the wall. January 21, 1990. Killed Tanya Bennett in Portland. 2 people got the blame, so I can kill again. And he did. 2 years later, he embarked on a killing spree.
What about Lori Ann Pentland?
Yes, I did kill her, yes. Her attitude was like her life was all hell and she didn't want to be around and she wanted me to feel sorry for her. And I just, well, you know, I can kill you and put you out of your misery. And she said, go for it, so I did.
She asked you to kill her?
Well, I told her that, you know, if your life's so bad, why don't you just end it?
He recounts the details of his crimes with a chilling lack of emotion. There was Cynthia Rose.
You killed her over a parking spot?
Yes, I did. It was supposed to be a parking spot.
Number 5 and 6 were Jane Doe's. In 1995, number 7, Angela Sabriz. Killing her, it seems, wasn't enough.
Is she the victim that you tied under the truck?
Yes, she is, yeah.
Why did you do that?
I felt that by dragging her under the truck, that I would destroy all evidence of who her identity was.
Did you choke all of the women?
Yes, I did, yeah.
Why did you choke them?
That's what I had done with the first one, so I never changed. It worked the first time, so I went to the second and third, fourth and fifth, sixth and seventh.
It is so gruesome what you're describing. I mean, there's a possibility that these people's family members might be listening to you describing this.
I'm sorry it happened. Wish it never happened. And can we move on?
Can we move on?
Yeah, I mean, come on. I mean, it's done, it's over with.
How would you feel if somebody did this to your daughter?
Well, I would probably search him down and kill him. Yes, I'd like to go back in time and change it and make it all go away and make it all peaches and cream again, but I can't do that. At the time, I could justify each and every one of those murders, and at this time, I cannot.
Coming up, Melissa wonders, was there one murder she could have prevented?
He asked if I would want to stay the night, and I declined. And then that night, he picked up a victim.
And later, what will she find when she comes face to face with the family of one of her father's victims? Stay with us.
Monster in My Family continues. Once again, Juju Chang.
Keith Jesperson, divorced father of 3, was on a 5-year, 5-state killing spree, but nobody suspected him. He was an anonymous truck driver just passing through town, except for an occasional visit with his children.
He came into town to visit, and he asked if I would want to stay the night like we would always do when he'd come into town. And I declined, and then that night he picked up a victim.
And killed her.
I think about, what if I would have stayed? Would that have happened? Would he have met her?
Remember, 2 people were already behind bars for his first murder, and Jesperson wasn't a suspect in any of the others. With the bodies piling up, Jesperson says he didn't want to get caught, but it was time for him to get credit.
And I was thinking, well, why not just stir up a hornet's nest?
So he wrote a 6-page confession letter to the Oregonian newspaper to prove he was the killer. In block letters, he detailed a virtual roadmap of his murders, names, dates, locations, even the sadistic torture methods. It started, "I would like to tell my story." The only thing missing was the name of the killer.
And at the very bottom, it put a little happy face,
earning him the nickname, the Happy Face Killer. In the letters, he claimed, "I do not want to kill again, and I want to protect my family from the grief that would tear it apart. I feel bad, but I will not turn myself in." Despite what he claims he wanted, Jesperson does kill again. But murder number 8 didn't fit the pattern. She wasn't a stranger to Jesperson. In fact, she was his long-term girlfriend, Julie Winningham, a woman he'd introduced to his own family.
Well, Julie and I were an item for several years. She had just gotten 2 DWIs, and she was facing some jail time in Clark County, and she needed someone to help pay her bills, and she just clung on, and I started laughing about it, because I knew the only way I could keep her out of jail is if I killed her. And so I did.
That made sense to you?
That made sense to me, yes.
Did it occur to you that you were taking somebody's life?
It became a nonchalant type thing. It's like shoplifting.
It is nothing like shoplifting. You're killing somebody.
It is everything like shoplifting. You're breaking the law, but you're getting away with it. And so there's a thrill of getting away with it.
Julie Winningham's body was discovered dumped over a highway embankment in Washington state. And it wasn't long before police found Jesperson's signature on a receipt among her possessions. So Detective Rick Buckner immediately hunted down Jesperson in New Mexico and brought him in for questioning.
I don't drink. I don't use drugs.
Despite hours of grueling interrogation, Jesperson denies any involvement in Winningham's murder.
We knew that, without his confession, we didn't have a case. We couldn't prove that he killed her.
But the next day, Buckner checks his voicemail, and what he hears is stunning.
I received a telephone message from him. All it said was, "You were right, I want to turn myself in."
I realized that I was done. I mean, I wasn't going to go anywhere. I was going to go to prison, and that's the way it was.
If you hadn't confessed to Julie's murder, do you think you would have ended up murdering more women?
Probably, yes.
I think he wanted to be noticed. In the letters that he had written to the newspaper, he wanted to be recognized for what he had done. I think that's probably the only reason he turned himself in.
Buckner only knew about one murder, but he was about to unravel a great deal more. While in custody, the detective overheard a phone conversation in which Jesperson urgently instructs his brother to destroy evidence that would finally connect all the dots. An apology and confession note Jesperson had mailed to his brother right before turning himself in. Instead, his brother gave it to the police.
Well, the letter was one page. It said he was sorry for the way he turned out, that he'd been a killer for 5 years and killed 8 women.
And to prove that he was the one who murdered Tanya Bennett, not those 2 people who confessed, Jesperson offered proof, telling police where he had thrown Bennett's purse after dumping her body.
5 years later, up to this point, nobody had ever found that.
It would be the final piece of missing evidence in an area covered with overgrown blackberry bushes several miles away from the body.
Boy Scouts went out, explorers went out a couple of days later, cleared out that whole area, and did in fact find a purse belonging to Tanya Bennett with her identification in it. Only the killer would know where that was.
Authorities say this confessed serial killer may have finally given prosecutors enough evidence.
A shocking confirmation of his guilt. Keith Jesperson was finally getting the infamy he was craving in an Oregonian courtroom.
Forced my fist into her throat, grabbed the rope and tied it around her neck. I washed the blood off the wall and tried to forget about it.
But 200 miles to the north, his shocked family is reeling.
My mom says your dad's in jail for murder. And then she just walked right back up the stairs.
I wanted to protect her, and I was trying to be the strong one. And the way I felt to protect them was by banning any kind of media into the home.
I pushed her down on the bed.
Jesperson says...
Forced my hand right down on her.
Jesperson.
I turned around and grabbed her.
Searchers found her body.
What were you feeling at the time? Anger.
The happy-faced killer.
But Melissa, now a high school student, felt compelled to learn more.
I went to the local library to see what was happening with the trial with my dad.
I grabbed her by her hair and just yanked on her, pulled her right onto the pavement. Hit the pavement. I can't remember if I put her face down or face up. If it got any contusions or any of that category, it could be after death markings. I don't know what I can say to the families to tell them that, they're not going to like me, I know that. But she didn't suffer.
I was so ashamed of who my father was. He brought us up believing that we needed to be good people, yet he was a total contradiction.
Well, how do you deal with the shame?
I wanted to hide. I wanted to be invisible.
It's like the ultimate family secret.
It is.
But she can't pretend forever. When we come back, how do you tell your children that their grandfather is an infamous serial killer, and your secret fear that his bad blood might even run in your veins?
I started to feel associated to his actions, that maybe I was a monster like him.
Plus, panic at the penitentiary. What happens when her kids come face to face with the monster in their family?
That's one moment in being a mother that I wish I could take back.
Stay with us.
2020 continues with Monster in My Family. Here again, Juju Chang.
By 2000, the nation had long since forgotten about the happy-faced killer and the 8 lives he'd cut short. But for his daughter, Melissa Moore, it's a memory she could never erase. When she was 21, she met a nice guy, Sam Moore, at a church dance. Things moved quickly, but she was nervous about the dark secret she had held inside for so long.
I knew that our relationship was going towards marriage, and I thought, well, this is something that he's gonna need to know.
My guess is that you have a very vivid memory of telling Sam.
I do. I have a very vivid memory. I said, hey, you always ask me, who my father is. I want you to know that he's in prison. And then I said, he's a serial killer. He put on the face that it didn't bother him.
I just loved her so much that I wasn't concerned about it.
I know your parents and your family had a little bit of a hard time.
There was some resistance, absolutely. My parents just wanted the best for me, and unfortunately it didn't come off that way. And I don't think they fully understood how much I loved my wife at the time, so.
What makes you emotional?
My parents love Melissa now, and I knew they would, so she's just so amazing, and I knew that they would see what I saw. And they did, and they do now.
Melissa and Sam first had a girl, Aspen, and then a son, Jake. But a cloud hung over this blissful family. A nagging fear. Does the urge to kill run in families? It kept Melissa up at night.
I used to be afraid my son might have characteristics or DNA that would prove that he is capable of being a sociopath like my dad. But then I realized by doing research that there's never been a case where a serial killer begot another serial killer. So far, there's no link of genetics. And that is what gives me peace.
And I don't think it's just the DNA. I think there's so many other variables. And I know the type of home that Melissa and I work on, trying to create for our children.
But as the Moores were settling into a normal life, letters continued arriving from her father, begging her to visit him in prison. It had been 10 years since Melissa last saw him, and it seemed those letters were finally beginning to wear her down.
I was kind of curious to see if I saw my dad, would he look like what I remembered him looking like, or would I see him as the convicted serial killer?
We anticipated meeting him behind a plexiglass wall, orange suit, phone.
Though Melissa and Sam brought along their then 4-year-old daughter and infant son, they say they never intended for them to see their grandfather behind bars. They were told there was a child care center on the premises, a place they thought the children could wait safely. But it wasn't what they thought.
There was a child center there, but the child center was where children could play with their parents that are imprisoned. And then I started noticing men around us that were in denim outfits with numbers on their shirt. And there were armed guards. And I then realized that we were going to meet my wife's father in person.
At first glance, a typical family snapshot, but it's actually a prison-issued photo op. Behind the forced smiles, Melissa and Sam were horrified.
And the whole time, I watched his interaction with Melissa, and I know what he is. I know what he's done. And I saw how it could be so confusing.
The meeting wasn't what Jesperson expected either.
It was uncomfortable. The last time I seen my daughter, she was 15 years old, and all of a sudden she's a mother and has children of her own and has a husband I've never met before.
He shook my hand, and he actually said, "Thank you for marrying my daughter. It's great to know that she's married somebody that's willing to protect her." And that threw me off guard.
I'm kind of like thrust into their world, and they're into my world. And how do I react to that? It's complicated.
I didn't want to talk about that he really was a convicted serial killer at that moment. I wanted to play that he was my dad.
But Melissa says it didn't work. Her then 4-year-old daughter got a creepy feeling from the tall stranger in a denim uniform.
Did she realize that this was her grandfather?
No, she didn't know who this man was.
Which probably eases your guilt, because I know you feel bad about that.
I do. That's one moment in being a mother that I wish I could take back.
That was nearly a decade ago. Since then, Melissa and her husband have decided to keep their distance because staying in touch seemed to be doing their family more harm than good. Nevertheless, the letters kept coming, and Melissa kept reading, but one was simply too obscene to overlook.
He sent me a birthday card that had a drawing of a naked lady on the cover, and on the inside it read, "Your husband sees you like this, but I still see you as my little girl." And my stomach turned, and I felt like I don't have to deal with this anymore. And that's when my husband started censoring the letters. And now they just don't get opened.
In your mind, is he gone?
Yes. The dad I loved, he's gone. That's the way I could separate them. the man that I grew up with and the man he is.
Their son Jake is now 11, and Aspen, a teenager about to enter high school. When I caught up with Melissa late last month, she said she still struggles with navigating the story of their grandfather's sadistic past.
It was really tough to try to find the resources to tell my children who their grandfather is. There's no books, like what to do if your dad's a serial killer. There's no pamphlets, no support groups. And the best answer that I could find for myself was just little by little.
In order to destigmatize the monster in her family, for her children, Melissa Moore decided to take a brave step and come out of the shadows to share her story.
And now I can move on from the darkness and close that door.
But before she can completely close that door behind her,
Here we go.
another one must open. When we come back, Melissa's new mission, meeting the family of one of her father's victims. But the reception wasn't exactly what she'd been hoping for.
In reality, we have to relive every moment.
When 2020 returns.
"2020 continues with Monster in My Family. Once again, Juju Chang.
Now living just outside Los Angeles, 36-year-old Melissa Moore says she's speaking out on behalf of all the relatives of mass murderers, those who feel they bear the burden of the sins of their fathers.
We are secondary crime victims. We carry that shame knowing that my father caused them pain, causes me pain.
She's written a book and she's profiled in this month's issue of Marie Claire magazine, becoming a kind of advocate or spirit guide for people like herself, unwitting members of the My Dad is a Serial Killer Club.
So many people are coming out of the shadows.
They have been living in shame the way I used to live in shame, thinking that you're somehow responsible for that family member's actions.
Melissa estimates she's been in contact with more than 100 children of murderers. She showed me some of those messages. This one, she says, from the daughter of the infamous BTK killer who strangled 10 people to death.
You know, not something one wants to have in common, but I appreciate your sentiments and I'm sorry that we share this common bond.
The day we spoke, another surprise in her inbox from the family of one of the most notorious killers of all time.
You just got an email this morning.
Yeah, I got an email from the Boston Stranglers family, and they're in hiding right now. They want to live a normal life.
But Melissa isn't just emailing, she's meeting with the families. And in her new TV series on LMN, Monster in My Family,
Hi, Michelle.
Melissa.
she is telling their stories.
So why do a show?
I really wanted to show people versus tell people when they ask me, how did you not know your father is a serial killer? We all have a common answer. They have a double life.
Double lives prominently on display in these exclusive home videos Melissa's obtained for the show, which premiered just last week.
It shows that these people that are monsters in society are loving fathers at home. They're the ones playing with their children, but then there's a whole nother side.
This playful dad is the DC sniper John Muhammad, who terrorized the nation's capital for 3 long weeks in 2002. That's him gently catching his daughter as she takes her first steps. This is serial shooter Dale Hausner boxing as a young man. And that seemingly loving dad giving his kids piggyback rides? The Spokane serial killer Robert Yates. He murdered up to 18 women. And these are his now grown daughters. Watch as Melissa introduces them to the sister of their dad's 12th victim.
Kathy, this is Amber.
My name is Amber.
For the killer's daughter, this embrace is the long-awaited relief she says she's desperately needed. These face-to-face meetings, a cornerstone of the series.
Give me an overall sense of what it was like to witness the reunions of the family members of those whose victims they hurt so badly.
It really felt like a sacred space. The emotion, the vulnerability that each family came to the table with.
But now it's Melissa's turn to come face to face with the sister of a woman her dad murdered.
Today, my mother and I are meeting one victim's sister to reach out and express our sorrow for what my father did. Oh, here we go.
His first victim, Tanya Bennett, the one whose murder he insisted on getting credit for.
What was going through your mind as you knocked on that door?
What can I give her? What can I give her? I have nothing. I'm coming into her space, into her world with nothing to offer her.
Unlike that other meeting, this one doesn't start out with a hug. But Melissa does her best to offer up an apology for her father's actions.
I've been looking forward to meeting with you and hearing about your sister, Tanya Bennett. And I want to express my condolences for your loss. I know it can never bring your sister back.
No, I was the closest to her, so why would anybody do what they did? But they did.
Michelle White, Tanya Bennett's sister, has a hard time making eye contact. She reacts slowly, but as they look at photos of Tanya from happier times, a tense Melissa tries again.
I'm ashamed that he's my dad.
Yeah.
I'm ashamed that he has no remorse. I'm ashamed of how he treated your sister and what he did to your sister. And I didn't hear Tanya's story. Her story hasn't been told.
No. It's all about your dad, all about your dad, all about your dad. And you have done a book about how you grew up, but this person had a life, and you yourself had made it more public.
Michelle unleashes her emotions, telling Melissa that her publicity only puts her family through more pain, reopening old wounds.
In reality, we have to relive every moment from the time she walked out that damn door that I should have stopped her.
You were met with a little bit of anger. And she said quite eloquently, you made me have to relive that all over again by making it so public.
To hear it from her, you know, that hurt. I'm not gonna lie, it hurt.
But then, as the meeting comes to an end,
I'm thankful that you did meet with me. So I want to say thank you to that.
Michelle surprisingly offers a bit of solace.
But don't ever feel guilty of what your dad did. Don't ever feel guilty, because it's just because you came from him doesn't mean you did it.
I want to just thank you for your time and
a tearful goodbye.
Sorry, I'm just full of tears and making you.
And finally, that elusive hug.
Today, so
okay.
you're fine.
Okay.
Did that help